The king pinned her brother to the wall, his kiss a bruising punishment. Julian threatened that for every step back, a piece of ice would be the penalty.
Terror cisdaria.
She feared the princess who had claimed to love her at first sight would be just as brutally possessive. Before the king's ultimatum, her brother's life or her own, Arya had been certain she was destined for an unmarked grave. After all, she had drunkenly propositioned a royal princess. But the fact that she was being offered a choice gave her a sliver of hope. She immediately pointed to a large water barrel in the courtyard where she knew her brother, Ethan, was hiding. She made it clear that if they killed him, they couldn't kill her. The barrel was overturned, and a pale-faced man stumbled out. It was Ethan, the long-lost Lord of Silverwood, thought dead for years. Armored soldiers stood behind King Julian, yet he only watched Ethan with a quiet intensity. He remarked on the long years since their last meeting, on the arduous search that had finally ended. Ethan instinctively moved back a step. It was a dance she didn't understand. One pursued, the other fled. Arya had only returned to the capital a month ago from the isolated area of Stonefall, where she had trained for 13 years. Busy taking command of the Silverwood Guard, she was unfamiliar with the court's intrigues. A question formed in her mind. Had her brother faked his death to escape the king? Suddenly, Julian surged forward. He seized Ethan's wrists with one hand, twisting them behind his back in a single, brutal motion. Ethan cried out, powerless as he was locked in the king's embrace. Julian expressed surprise at his weakness. He lifted one of Ethan's arms, his laugh devoid of humor. He recalled that it was this very hand that had once driven a sword through his chest. Arya was stunned. She had despised Ethan for years, believing he had murdered their parents to inherit the title. To learn he had also attempted regicide was another layer of betrayal. The king toyed with Ethan's limp arm, mocking his inability to even struggle. It was more than an inability. Ethan's frail body looked as if it had only a few years left in it. Ethan's smile was bitter as he tried to retreat again. A dark look crossed Julian's face. He leaned close to Ethan's ear, his voice a low, velvet threat, promising a shard of ice for every backward step. He knew, he murmured, how much the Lord of Silverwood dreaded the cold. Ethan froze, trapped against the wall, the corners of his eyes turning red. His long lashes trembled, like a butterfly caught in a storm, yet he dared not move. The silence was so profound that a dropped pin would have echoed. Seemingly satisfied, Julian reached out and pinched Ethan's earlobe. He cooed that this was better. Though it was the height of summer, Ethan's body was no longer what it once was and couldn't handle the chill of ice. He called him by a childhood name, Eth, a name reserved for only the closest of kin. The intimate name seemed to break something in Ethan, and he began to struggle violently. Julian's eyebrow rose. He clamped a hand around Ethan's slender neck, forcing his head up. He questioned if only Ethan was allowed to betray him, while he was forbidden from retaliating. He ordered him to look at the gift he had prepared. Ethan's face, held fast in the king's grip, was forced to turn towards the courtyard. A magnificent carriage, gilded and draped in scarlet, was being brought in. Sunlight glinted off its ornate carvings of swans with intertwined necks and lotus blossoms. It was a wedding carriage. The blood drained from Ethan's face. Julian smiled, leaning in to whisper each word with deliberate cruelty. He had come to marry him. He asked if Ethan wasn't happy. Ethan was far beyond unhappy. He looked on the verge of tears. He begged the king for mercy, pleading that he would never dare again. At that, Julian's expression turned to ice. The sheer weight of his royal authority was suffocating. The king's voice rose, his hands tightening. He demanded to know what Ethan no longer dared to do. Love him or kill him. Julian stated that, for the sake of their 10 years together in the palace, he would offer a choice. Ethan could walk to the carriage himself or he would be carried. Though Arya hated her brother, she couldn't bear to see him humiliated. His condition looked genuinely dire. As the situation spiraled, she tried to intervene, explaining that Ethan's health was poor. But Ethan cut her off before she could finish. His voice strained as he bit back the words. What did it matter? He was dying anyway. The king's attention finally shifted to her. He noted that Arya was his sister, and it was remarkable how the Silverwood Guard had passed seamlessly into her hands after all these years. He mused that he should have realized then that Ethan was hiding in plain sight. He asked if faking his death had been amusing, if watching him search like a madman had been entertaining. Faced with the king's accusations, Ethan closed his eyes, offering no defense. Julian then pointed at Arya. He declared her the person Ethan now cared about most. He ordered his guards to bind her. Ethan cried out, his voice filled with anguish, protesting that Arya was the new Lord of Silverwood and the commander of the guard. Such an act would destabilize the army. But chains were already wrapping around Arya's wrists and ankles, pulled taut by the armored guard. Despite her martial training, she was helpless. The king acknowledged the risk but pointed out that she had publicly accosted the princess. Furthermore, she was his leverage. He knew Ethan would submit to save her. Ethan's eyes blazed with fury. He accused the king of being unscrupulous. Julian's laugh was mocking. He reminded Ethan that it was he who had taught him that the ends justify the means. He asked his dear, beloved little master if he was proud that his own lessons were now being used against him. Master. The king had called her brother master. The complexity of their relationship was staggering. But Arya was more concerned with the immediate chaos. She needed to know what was happening. Why the fake death? Why summon her back to the capital? Why was his relationship with the king so fraught, and his health so broken? Inside the lurching carriage, her questions sounded sharp. Ethan shook his head, his face a mask of shame, and apologized for the spectacle. That was all the confirmation she needed. In the years she was gone, he and the king had been lovers. She pressed on, asking if their parents' murder was connected to the king. Ethan flinched and shook his head again, gently this time. The death of their parents was the unhealed wound between them, the reason she had fled to the area of Stonefall for 13 years while he remained in the capital to claim the title. Her bringing it up now seemed to make him reflective. He was about to speak when the carriage jolted to a halt. Julian ripped open the door and dragged Ethan out. They were in a derelict wing of the palace. The red paint on the doors was peeling, and cobwebs laced the corners. In the center of the dusty hall stood a cage woven from golden wire, studded with countless pearls and jewels, its threshold carved from a single piece of jade. The moment Ethan saw it, he collapsed. The king, holding him by the neck, noted that while the cage was old, its intended occupant was not as he remembered. He said he had kept this cage ready for years, waiting so long that the Hall of Lasting Grace had fallen into ruin before its master returned. He reminded Ethan of their old promise, to grow old together, to never betray one another. If one did, the other would build a golden cage to lock them away. Ethan trembled. Julian's hand caressed his face, his voice a hypnotic whisper. He had remembered every vow, even after Ethan had faked his own death. He had still built this cage for him, a testament to his devotion. Arya watched, her heart pounding. This was more than a lover's quarrel. It was a saga of love turned to obsessive hatred. Ethan finally nodded, asking to be released. A flicker of relief crossed Julian's face. He began to untie the ropes, murmuring that this was better. But in that instant, Ethan broke free. He vaulted towards the palace wall, intending to escape. Julian's smile was cold. He gestured, and a bow and arrow were brought to him. He drew the string, aiming at Ethan's fleeting figure, and mused aloud that despite his feigned weakness, his little master was still formidable. Arya lunged forward to stop him. The king was a legendary archer, and she could see the desperate strain in Ethan's movements. The arrow flew. Her heart leaped into her throat. But the shaft only grazed Ethan's arm, the force of its passage knocking him from the wall. He landed with a thud. Julian strode over and hauled him to his feet. His voice was raw with fury as he demanded to know why Ethan still dared to run. He revealed Ethan's deepest secret. The esteemed Lord of Silverwood had been the old king's personal assassin. He asked how many dirty deeds Ethan had done for that man, and if he remembered the fear in his own eyes when Ethan's sword pierced his chest. The past was being ripped open. Arya was horrified. Her brother had betrayed their family's allegiance to Prince Valerius to serve the old king, only to be used as a covert killer. The irony was sickening. Ethan seemed to agree, closing his eyes in shame. The king's anger turned to a cruel smile. He asked an attendant how many steps Ethan had taken. The answer was just under 15. Julian declared he would be generous and call it 14. A tray of glistening ice cubes, shimmering with a frigid mist, was brought forward. He shoved Ethan against the wall again. He had warned him, one step, one piece of ice. He wanted to see how long his master could endure. The ice was crystal clear, refracting the sunlight into 1,000 tiny rainbows. Two servants held Ethan's arms. The king picked up a piece of ice, pried open Ethan's mouth, and forced it inside. One piece, then another, then a third.
Arya watched, bewildered.
She didn't understand how this could be a punishment. Then she saw the veins bulge on Ethan's neck. His breathing grew ragged, and sweat beaded on his forehead. His face became ashen, as if he were on the verge of collapse. Seeing his distress seemed to soothe Julian's temper. He crossed his arms, studying Ethan's pained expression. He commented that the old king had clearly used him up and thrown him away. Ethan turned his face away, but a memory stirred in Arya. The archives at the Eyrie of Stonefall held records of the world's secrets. One entry described how the royal family controlled its assassins with a poison known as sunfire toxin. It made the afflicted terrified of cold, for contact with ice felt like being burned alive. Her brother, Julian, forced Ethan's face back towards him. He said that Ethan had claimed he was forced to attack him. If the old king wouldn't even give him the antidote, it proved he was coerced. He begged Ethan to just say the word. Ethan, through a wave of agony, managed a faint, weak smile. He asked if the king truly believed that. He was sure Julian had investigated over the years. Killing him had always been the mission. He asked if Julian was so desperate for affection that he would cling to a few past kindnesses and believe Ethan was devoted to him. The king's face darkened. He grabbed a handful of Ethan's hair, yanking his head back. He confessed that he had always held onto a sliver of hope that if Ethan would only offer an explanation, true or not, he would believe it. But he had forgotten that a dog is just a dog, a tool of its master. There was no point wasting emotion on one. Ethan's lips trembled, but he said nothing. Julian, overcome with frustration, released him abruptly. Ethan's head hit the wall with a dull crack. Exhausted, the king waved a hand. The servants resumed their task, forcing more ice into Ethan's mouth. Ethan let out a muffled groan, his body racked with tremors. Arya looked away, telling herself that he deserved this for his crimes. A choked, strangled sound made her look back. Ethan had bitten his lip so hard that he'd drawn blood, and then he coughed up a great mouthful of it. Ethan. Julian moved with impossible speed, catching his brother as his body went limp. He was unconscious. The king held him, his gaze tracing the lines of his face, lingering on the crimson staining his lips. He sighed, a sound of profound weariness, and lifted Ethan into his arms. He was taking him somewhere. Arya feared it was to the gilded cage. She stepped forward, bowing, and requested that, despite his crimes, Ethan be handed over to her care. Julian gave her a chilling look. He informed her that he was dealing with a private family matter and asked in what capacity she intended to intervene. Family matter? She was speechless. Julian glanced behind her and smirked. It seemed, he said, that her own family matters required attention. A herald's voice rang out. Her Royal Highness, Princess Claire, has arrived. Instinct took over.
Arya bolted.
A hand gently snagged the collar of her tunic. She turned slowly, her heart hammering. Princess Claire stood there, her smile radiant. She pointed to the nearby gilded cage and asked if the young Lord of Silverwood wanted one of her own. Dragged by the scruff of her neck, Arya trembled. Her history with the princess was complicated. It began at the Eyrie of Stonefall. After her parents' death and her brother's betrayal, the 5-year-old Arya was taken in by the masters there. As the youngest student, she was spoiled and headstrong. When a new girl, the young princess, arrived, Arya had promptly pinched her cheeks and declared she would marry her one day. She forgot the promise as soon as she made it, but the princess became utterly infatuated. Years of her clinging devotion became unbearable. Arya first retreated into solitary training for years, then left the Eyrie altogether. But now, the princess was a stunning young woman, and after a few drinks, Arya had, to her horror, propositioned her all over again. So now she sat cross-legged in a golden cage, shackles on her wrists and ankles. She pleaded with the princess, insisting it was Zen.